Okay, I will call the meeting of the Gloucester School Committee Program Subcommittee meeting to order. Today is Monday, June 15th, 2020. I'm Joel Pavaza. I'm joined by Samantha Berger-Watson and Laura Wiesen, GHS Principal Cook, and Assistant Superintendent Greg Bach are both here, as is Superintendent Dr. Sapphire. Thank you all for joining. Just at the outset, Greg, I received your email regarding the conflict of time, so I'm thankful that you guys were able to make it. I wasn't expecting you to be able to. It was just so difficult with all the other meetings we have school committee-wise this week. When Laura, Sam, and I had found a day and time that worked, it was going to be hard to push it off again. So I didn't want you to think of that. I wasn't trying.
No problem. I'm glad it worked out for James.
Yeah. So that being said, and while you're here, do you want to provide the first item, which is the update on the discussions where the attendance works?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for, if we could give Gail Avery another moment. Gail Avery is the attendance, what is the title, James? Supervisor or coordinator?
Supervisor, yeah,
Attendance supervisor. And
listed as an attendee.
which, I don't see you on here. Oh.
I promoted her to a panelist.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. I didn't see you on my screen. So, Gail, there's Gail.
Sorry, I was here, but I couldn't figure out the format looked a little different.
Okay. So Gail and I have been talking. Gail works closely with James and all of the principals across the district, and with our district data manager and just assistant principals. She works with a lot of people to manage all aspects of attendance, truancy, court visits, unfortunately, which is one of the goals, is to, as I think Gail said today when talking with her, the goal really is to reduce the amount of time that she spends dealing with truancy and going through the court system, when we need to really be leaning heavily on prevention. So I asked Gail if she would join us to, wait till Joel gets back. I asked Gail if she would join us today. We've both been talking to Attendance Works, and I'll share. They did send a proposal. It's very brief. It's more of a short scope of work. I can share what that looks like, and actually I'll email that momentarily. But I really wanted to give an introduction about how we might be able to use an organization like Attendance Works, where it would fit in the overall picture of our response to the absenteeism that we see. Luckily James is with us today too, because the three of us will need to work really closely on this. Thankfully now with a program subcommittee to help us out with some of the horsepower too. So I'll just start briefly by saying that I did reach out to Attendance Works. I've had 2 meetings, and I think Gail has one scheduled for tomorrow, I believe. We talked about the context of our district. I shared the data from our district for the last couple of years. They really were sort of spot on, in my opinion, of where they thought energy should be focused. And in sort of in a nutshell, I think I shared that I felt that our chronic absenteeism, which, as you may recall, last year at the high school alone was 30% of all students were listed chronically absent, which is 18 or more days in a year. But I did put together some more data, and we will, put together a whole report. But the average number of days missed for that group is actually quite high. I believe it was something like, might have been 33 days. It's a stunning number of days missed. So, we've got a major problem, and I think I shared earlier this year that I felt we're at a point where this is a citywide issue that needs to be approached from school leaders, elected officials, city officials. I mean, this just needs to be something that is on our minds and on our lips every day for the next few years until we can turn around this issue, because it's that substantial. So as I laid out just the data with the attendance works folks, their immediate response was, you can make small adjustments, but you're not going to get anywhere until you really shift the community-wide thinking around school attendance. And so that's where they would come in. They would come in at a higher level. Part of what they recommend is that you have to start by educating those involved first. And that means, basically, they said, get all the people that you think are going to be the movers and shakers, and let's get them into a room and let's have a common understanding, common education, and then common messaging out of those meetings. And they said that they do this frequently, where they will come in and help facilitate the information, the training, the sort of discussion at that group of community members, parents, school officials, city officials, that group. And I can't remember the size that we were talking about that would be manageable, but that core group, they come in and do the sort of education, the background education, and then doing what's root cause analysis for our community. So they may have a lot of background information nationally, but there are always local contexts that then that group would go through that process of determining root cause, rather than me saying, well, I think it's this, and James sharing his piece, and Gail sharing, everybody sharing their piece of what they believe is the issue. That group of 12 to 15 people might do the learning and then do the root cause, and then be that group that sort of is the anchor group to keep pushing us forward. And that, my assumption is that the program subcommittee would probably be a core part of that group. That's just an assumption. So I'm going to stop there, because that's really what they do. And then they do some consulting to then help sort of guide us in our next steps, and help us create a plan. Gail, maybe this might be, if this is okay, if Gail, you've had follow-up conversations with Attendance Works, and I think you have another meeting coming up, and perhaps you'd like to share a little bit. And I'm wondering if you could share the more specific level, like sort of second level idea that we talked about with the Harvard group.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually was able to move my meeting up to today in preparation for our meeting tonight. So I was able to kind of get a real snapshot of what you already knew, but also to ask some very specific questions about how this all fits in. So to kind of give folks a little bit of a background on what I've been working on, and what I am sort of focusing on is, by the time I get to be involved with students, it's really far up in that game. So the school adjustment counselors, the guidance counselors, the deans, principals are already involved. They've already done everything they can do, and it's time now to start thinking about what are the next steps. So over the past year, usually what that looked like was either putting a different perspective on it and a different set of eyes and ears on the situation, or going straight to filing in court. What I can tell you is that I come from a lot of time in court, having worked for DCF. I'm no stranger to court, but the CRA process has changed substantially, and it's going to continue to lose any efficacy that it ever had. And I'm not sure that it ever really was efficient, but some juvenile justice reform laws have changed. And to make a very, very long story short, we cannot rely on court to be the intervention, and we cannot rely on DCF to be the intervention, because we need to be changing those relationships. And much like, Greg talks about moving the ship of attendance and the focus, those are two different ships that we're going to have to move as well. So that being said, Attendance Works actually can help us with that too. But we're in tough shape. I mean, we have a lot of students that miss a lot of school with a lot of really complex issues. And that's not just the high school, it's not just the middle school. But it's going to be an issue that we're going to really have to focus on. And we really have to come up with a comprehensive, universal plan that, in my opinion, may mean taking a look at the policy, especially going forward. I've met with the supervisors of attendance across the state a couple of times now, most recently Friday. What I'm learning is some of the areas with really great attendance actually have far fewer accepted absences. So for instance, Boston Public Schools, if you miss more than 3, your attendance failure is there. And so when we went around the room and talked about what ours looked like, I got, of course, some very bright-eyed looks about that. So, we may need to take a look at what that looks like, especially when we're putting the possibility of being remote in there, and what does that look like? So I had 2 different pieces that I was working on this year. One was the Attendance Works sort of models and practices that they offer. But then one of the school adjustment counselors at the middle school had let me know that there was a training that they had gone to. There was a professor at Harvard, Todd Rogers, who has some pretty amazing stuff going on, where they're working on intervention and communication with families. And there's a lot of science behind it and what we need to do in terms of our letters. So that's a program that's out there. It's called Everyday Labs. If people want to kind of take a poke around in that, it's actually really interesting stuff. But I spoke with them. I had a meeting with them before pandemic. I thought it was a little more than maybe we would be willing to spend, but we didn't even get to talk about it because then we were home. I've met with them again since the pandemic because they've now created another subset of a program that's designed to help schools transition back to school, but also transition in and out of school if for some reason there's an outbreak or whatever, and tomorrow we can't go to school. What does that look like? They handle a lot of communication and data around that. I brought that up this morning in my meeting with Attendance Works, and basically they've acknowledged they are collaborative partners with Everyday Labs, but when you're kind of thinking about how we're going to tackle this, Attendance Works is phase 1, and Everyday Labs really needs to be phase 2. It needs to be the next level, and we really can't work with that until we've built the foundation. So like Greg said, it's a lot of education, but it's basically to talk about the urgency, to talk about the consequences for not fixing these problems, how to measure attendance with distance learning being a component of that. And then the second sort of phase of it would be, taking a look at that root cause analysis. I can tell you that was stuff that I was already starting to process. It's pretty clear that kids miss school for some pretty specific reasons. And we can't solve this problem until we understand what those are and until we have some clear plans about what needs to happen moving forward. So they have, they're the experts in this. They've been doing this nationally with many, many schools across the country for a long period of time. So rather than me creating a survey or a study and trying to get to this, it makes a whole lot more sense considering the urgency that we have to use the people who already know what they're doing. And that's not to say I don't know what I'm doing, but these guys are far more experienced at this than I am. and then basically they were talking about, they have the ability to build district capacity to be successful when remote learning is involved and when we're back in the building full time. So, coming up with strategies and interventions. But then there's the huge piece of trauma. And so they said that basically they're working on a whole new subset component of trauma-informed interventions, because they know that the pandemic has caused trauma, and that our kids who are struggling with attendance, oftentimes trauma is a component. So they have developed plans for how that's going to look for the students that that we're targeting. But really having to understand who these kids are is important. And then, basically they're talking a lot about, the evidence-based strategies to focus on those kids that would have been or are chronic attendance kids, before pandemic. But basically the idea is that we need to reframe our focus from being on truancy to being on the prevention and education and the communication piece. So we kind of need to do both at the same time, because we can't stop the ship until we, we can't do both. We have to be able to do both, I mean. So, that program is much more cost effective for where we need to be, I think. And, they have some connections nationwide that I think will be really successful. They've already figured out how to work with some of the data around remote learning and being able to really know who is where and who's expected to be where, which I think is the simplest thing that we don't necessarily know the answer to just yet. So, I mean, that's basically, and she talked a lot about being able to be available, for consultations. We need to really focus on having attendance teams in each school that meet regularly. They can give us guidance on the content of those meetings and, how often we need to meet and who should be sitting at that table, so that we're not kind of throwing things against the wall to see if they stick. We really have a concrete plan that we know what we're going to do. And then just trying to scan through my notes and see if there was anything I missed.
So maybe we should, Gail, just, Joel, if you agree, maybe Gail's laid out the sort of the next couple levels and given an overview. Might be a good chance to take a few questions, and then we can see where people would like some information filled in. So in summary, Attendance Works looks like a very good partner to work with as a first phase to help us lay the groundwork for a team that would help us move the whole community forward. And that group would also do the root cause analysis and some of the planning. And then we might be able to also then write a grant down the road for potentially a phase 2 with, the Harvard partnership might be a good match for a more focused intervention program. So that's just the quick overview. Maybe we could take a few questions.
Yeah, sure. I also just want to note that Kathy Clancy's here. Hi, Kathy. I think you're a panelist, so feel free to jump in if you need to jump in. That being said, Laura, your hand's up. Why don't you go?
So all of it sounds extremely interesting and important. I'm curious about moving forward, how we, I was glad to hear what Gail said, that they're also looking at the remote learning and how we're going to figure out the remote learning piece. I guess I'm a little bit confused about that, since there are so many reasons kids may not be participating in remote learning that are different. They may intersect, but they're just access to internet and that kind of thing. So do we need to, and this is a real question, do we need to sort of identify all those things as we move forward? Or, I guess I'm wondering what's the most effective way to both do remote and for when we return to the buildings, sort of the larger problem.
Can I
So-
jump in, Laura? Just, I'm curious if I have the same question. Are you wondering if the root cause analysis might not be super accurate because people are going to be missing? Like, should we wait to do the root cause analysis until we're actually physically in the building?
Well, I mean, it's sort of a question, although I imagine these people are sophisticated enough to be able to discern, you know, I imagine that they know, right? They know who doesn't have access to a Chromebook or to, and then who doesn't, you know, it makes for a more complex root analysis. I'm just wondering how we start that process, even though I'm completely on board in starting the process, given that we don't even know what's happening in the fall yet. So, you know, it's a series of questions.
So I can probably speak to that. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a backstory, I started looking at some of this stuff. Dr. Sapphire and I met on this early in the year. And basically, they already have a program that exists where you can dump, well, essentially you have the two systems working together, their module and our module. But essentially you put our data into their system and it will tell us exactly who we need to focus on. Is it our ELL kids? Is it our special ed kids? Is it our, you know, males? Is it our, what age group? Where does this start? So they already have those systems in place to be able to identify those. And I think that, you know, basically what she was telling me, because we kind of got off on a tangent and started talking about student information systems and what each system can offer us. Because I'm still learning School Brains and I know that there's a lot we don't know just yet. But there are some other programs that have some different functionality that might be really useful to us in the future. But for instance, she was saying that one of the great things about partnering with them is that they are working with nationwide partners. And so she was explaining that there is someone in Hartford, Connecticut that is a, you know, systems specialist and has already figured out how to track the distance learning, how to track participation rates, how to know exactly who has devices or device issues, who has connectivity issues, and has created an ability for principals or administrators, whoever, to have instant dashboards that are specific to that information. You know, so their work with us can be partnering us with them to say, okay, what have you already figured out and how do we adopt that? Because that's something that we need. Unfortunately, I think we have a lot of back end stuff to do before we kind of get to those conversations, but they're already doing it and they already have partners who are doing it. So, you know, to Samantha, to your question, my personal opinion is we can't wait, because I think that my biggest learning over the past year and a little bit that I've been in this position is, unfortunately, waiting until I'm involved or waiting until it's court involvement or waiting until DCF is way too late. We've lost our window of opportunity. So while I appreciate what you guys are thinking about, like, let's wait until we see what this is going to look like, I think that we can use it despite what it looks like, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, Sam.
So I guess I'm definitely not advocating for waiting. I'm just worried that the data won't be as clear, because kids might be missing school, remote learning school, for different reasons than they would if we were physically in a building. And so I guess I'm worried that the integrity of the data won't be as good and won't be as useful to us. So I definitely don't think we should be waiting for anything, but you know, I know that there are high school kids working all day and every day, and that's not going to be happening if school's in session, you know, physically in session. So I guess I'm just sort of wondering what people's thoughts are on that piece of it.
Greg, go ahead.
And I appreciate that there's no question that the remote learning has complicated matters, but I also feel that this is, because this is not a new problem, we have been collecting data for a number of years, and we've been collecting perception data. So we've been collecting other kinds of things from students. So we've got quite a body of information already that tells us about what had been leading up until this moment in time. I would like to suggest that, because it's my hope that we aren't perpetually in a remote learning environment, that the kind of work that we do that goes back a number of years and is building that picture, that we can, that there are other ways for us to figure out, okay, what's happening in the here and now that we can adjust for, but that the bigger underlying reasons are still going to be there no matter what, and that we've got a lot of information that we can draw on. And by the time we get a really full-fledged, mature program going anyway, it could be, could be a year. So my hope is that, once we really get things moving in the right direction, it's perfectly timed.
Dr. Sapphire, please.
Hi, Gail. You had mentioned the number of absences, allowable absences, I think, when you were speaking, and there's always been a tension between setting, relatively stringent expectations versus the concerns of kids and their circumstances, particularly, for example, the EL population and the like. So in your meetings, and I don't think it's a tension that can be resolved easily, but was there a sense of direction that you came away with as to how to establish or what the, whether it should be that's more stringent or something there where you have to take into account many of the social concerns that we have for families?
What I can tell you is just based on what I heard during those meetings is, I know I just on Friday met with Chelsea, was one of the partners that was present for our very impromptu meeting around policy and what are we going to do next and what are people expecting for next year. Chelsea allows 3. And so, to look at, that's a community that has, I would guess, some of the same demographic challenges that we have, some of the same challenges in their students that we have. So, we didn't really get into the details of, does that work? Does that not work? How big is your problem? How big is my problem? But I think that Attendance Works is really the expert about that. And I think that they can take a look at what we're doing now and what they know about policy and procedure. And they're designed to tailor our policy and procedures to the goals that we need to reach now. And, Greg, I know you mentioned sort of getting something in place, but I think that my understanding, unless I'm inaccurate, is that we're going to kind of get a ball rolling. We're not going to have to wait a year to develop a system and start using it. It's going to be basically, their proposal is, let's pick a time.
I meant the phased in part, like phase 2, getting to that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's going to take some time.
Right. So we put things into place. I meant a mature program that's been really rolling.
Yeah, definitely. But it sounds like we can get some meetings going over the summer and really start the fall with a plan.
Yeah, that's their recommendation, is to start this summer.
Mr. Cook?
Sure. I just wanted to add to Gail's response to Dr. Sapphire's question, that I know from regular meetings with principals that there's policy and then there's how the policy is implemented, right? That can look kind of, pretty different. And that's where strongly agreeing with expertise here, right? That we can, as we do, pool, what are the policies of Chelsea, Beverly High School, Lynn, Salem, looking at various communities, Peabody, as we've done, and then probing about, well, how actually is it implemented in practice, right? What does that look like? Because that's different than the policy itself. Even if the policy is the same, how it's implemented can be quite different building to building in terms of exemptions and in terms of the communication, as Gail talked about, right? What are the kinds of letters that are going out? What's the communication look like that goes out? So so we've done that other kind of work to arrive at policies that we currently have. What's new here is really getting involved with folks who have focused, because at the high school, remember, this is one of our 3 areas for sustainable improvement, right? Is it really going after not just attendance overall, but particularly the chronic absenteeism problem. So since we've identified that as a problem, Gail and Greg have really begun digging into some of the expertise here on policy, implementation, communication, and then going deeper into prevention and interventions underneath that come, hopefully before you even have to enact the policy, implement a consequence from a policy. So I see the comprehensive approach is something that is so valuable, because we have identified district-wide this is one of the key things. If we can fix this, it then will help us fix other things as well.
Ben.
So I would assume that one of sort of the prevention pieces would be like how we're building relationships with students from like preschool on, right? And like keeping in mind our population and family histories and so on and so forth. So I guess I'm curious, do they make suggestions on ways to do that? Like we have one school that's trauma informed, and I know from speaking to Matt that since being trauma informed, he's seen an improvement in some of his attendance and some of his most high risk kids. So I guess I'm curious, is that part of it, that we start to implement that district wide, something to that extent? And would that come from attendance works? Would they make that suggestion?
Yeah, I can speak on that. So actually I have it starred and underlined a couple times on my notes. Partnering with families is really the focus. So instead of calling a family and saying, your student missed again, what's going on there? The emphasis is really from the beginning and from the beginning of the year around that partnership, around engaging families. And they said that there's a huge piece of engaging the student's voice and meeting families where they're at. So, essentially, yes. And I don't know, they haven't shared with me what those are. I think that's what we pay for, but basically that's the basis of what we've got to get better at. And they're going to tell us how to do that, I guess.
Mr. Cook.
Sure. Yeah. I want to amplify that with some things we've learned from this remote learning period, and where we have so many more staff members doing such a greater volume of that kind of outreach on a regular basis to engage kids in the remote learning, that we've found even that just sharing some basic scripts with some teachers for their outreach has made a huge difference in the success of an intervention, right, with a student, and just changing the, instead of front loading the deficit or the problem, an invitation to collaborate with the family on, how to re-engage the student and so on. It's just made a huge difference. And so I think that's like a little taste in some of the adjustments we made on that kind of remote learning outreach of the kind of thing we could benefit from with, with the attendance works folks.
So just to circle back on a couple of things that were said in the initial presentation. So although we haven't gone through the attendance works process where they will do their own root cause analysis, Gail, you had mentioned that you had already kind of begun that work. And so, from what you had already looked into from previous data, are you finding that the absenteeism or the absent, the days in which students are being absent are preventable, avoidable, discretionary, or is it, something that the student wasn't going to make it regardless?
So I think that it's very complicated. And I think that that's not a cop-out answer. That's a real, true answer. What I can tell you is somebody asked me along the lines, we started some talks with much bigger partners. And basically people were saying, I really wonder how many of our kids are involved with the Department of Children and Families. And I said, I can tell you right now that 100% of my caseload is or should be. Is or I filed, or is or I'm about to file. So we know most of these kids, I would say and this is just kind of off the cuff, but I would say at least 95% of the students that we have that get to me at this point have trauma. They have either they themselves or they have a parent with mental health issues. We have a lot of students who are, I would be willing to bet, are chronic absentee kids from 5 and maybe 20 years back, that this is a family norm for them. You know, so we've got a lot of work to do on that early intervention, that teaching, that partnering, that sort of ability to partner with families on, they need to look at things a little bit differently. And so we have to, so basically what Attendance Works is saying is this is a whole community issue that we've got to really get those pediatricians involved. I can't tell you how many pediatricians I've had conversations with that are writing notes for kids that they need a 504 for emotional issues. Well, what does that mean? Or excuse their absences because they have GI issues, or excuse their absences because they have school anxiety. Well, unfortunately, I was signed up for a training in May that was about, you know, school anxiety and what to do about it. But we have a tremendous number of kids with school anxiety. And if we think that that problem's going to get better over the summer, we're crazy, because it's going to be a whole lot worse. So that's, I mean, it's all the things we think it is. And there is also that big subset of people too, that parents are off at work already, and there's no one holding them accountable to get up and to get out the door. And we know transportation's an issue too.
Right, and so that was kind of, you know, my thinking, and so Greg, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but the kind of order of operations here, or division of labor, would be that, you know, we'd pull on Attendance Works, they would analyze and prescribe some, you know, practices and protocols to put into place. It may come back to the school committee if there's policies that need to be changed, but we'd be looking for, you know, the kind of community-wide, you know, Gloucester goes to school, and there's, you know, Gloucester goes to school banners and that sort of thing. My curiousness is around the concept that that whole, you know, Gloucester goes to school might be an effective message for the student who otherwise could have gone to school that day, but for one discretionary reason or another didn't, versus the student who, you know, maybe wanted to go to school that day, but wasn't able to get there because, you know, adults in their life with, you know, the final say in what happens that student's day, you know, was the hurdle. You know what I'm trying to say? So I'm curious whether Attendance Works is going to grapple with all of those different types of absences. Greg?
Yeah, I just, I think earlier in one of our meetings, I mentioned that entry into kindergarten, and it's even preschool, but definitely entry into kindergarten was one of those critical moments, and that we had been working before the closure, we had been working on revamping the kindergarten orientation for parents, because that message really needs to be really, really heavy in the kindergarten and first grade and second grade, so that those patterns and habits are established and that they stick. I agree with you. When I look at all of the reasons why kids miss school, it's pretty daunting. When I look at the, you know, school work or Attendance Work suggestion is to make sure that you're addressing the immediate areas where it's worst, but you're also preventing, and preventing means getting our messaging and our community-wide information down to the early grades. What I think Attendance Works will do with us is not just prescribe a set of practices and tasks, but actually meet with us as a group, that group of a dozen or so people, to explore the causes and reasons, and then to prioritize. We think we can do 3 of these really well in phase 1. So we're going to work on, maybe it is trauma sensitivity training. Maybe that's one of the ones, but I think that's going to be the group's local learning and work in concert with Attendance Works, with their guidance, to come up with those priority areas. And I think it's going to be a combination of, I think it's going to be an and. We need to pick those who it's discretionary for, especially at the younger grades, before the habits have set in, and those who are really prevented by some structural issue that keeps them out of school. I think we're going to have to pick a balance of each, and we'll have to pick enough that we can manage.
Sam, I've seen your hand go up.
Well, so I think just from my work doing in-home family therapy, right? Like most of my treatment plans in relation to attendance was obviously in relation to the parents, right? So we're looking at like generational trauma, and if we don't address that somehow, we're going to be spinning our wheels, in my opinion. So I think, I had moms who couldn't get their kids out of the house because they were like not mentally and physically capable of doing it. It was too much work for them because of their own trauma and or mental health issues, or substance use issues. So I think part of this really, and I'm sure this is part of the plan, is to partner with some of our mental health agencies, because I do feel like oftentimes when I would get referrals, I wish they had been 3 years before that. Right? Like I wish they had, the referral came to me when a kid was 3 or 4 in preschool. And I don't know how to get to the bottom of that, because I think oftentimes we wait until the behaviors show up, but I do think we can do a better job of trying to get a handle on someone's family history and connecting with that family from the jump, and provide resources and create a relationship way sooner than when if we're waiting for the kid to show behaviors, it's too late, in my opinion. So I do think we all sort of need to get on the same page as far as that's concerned, and really have some hard discussions about what that looks like. And I have ideas on what that looks like. And maybe Gail and I, we can talk about that. But we can't leave that piece out, because the family work is really where this needs to happen.
And to kind of speak on that, if I may, we had kind of already started some of that. So right before, I guess, the beginning of the year or so, I met with the Department of Public Health, Amy Epstein, who has a lot of connections in a lot of different areas. And we had pulled together an attendance work group with just that focus. Mm-hmm. So we had hoped to have someone from, the middle and high school, which we did, the school resource officers, Leahy, Children's Friend, Compass, and, and on and on and on and on. To come to the table and really talk about what is the problem, how can we fix it. I can tell you that one of the major problems I saw throughout the whole thing is parents don't know how to put kids to bed. Starting at a very young age, they don't know the importance of a sleep routine. They don't know how to take the video games away. They don't know how to shut Wi-Fi off. And, so for me to have a conversation with a 10th grade student's parent to say, shut off the Wi-Fi at a certain time. If they don't go to school, they don't sit home and play video games all day. And those are the kinds of educational pieces and support pieces that we recognized even just the beginning of last year about what this needs to look like. And I think that needs to be more in play going forward, so that, because I can't be everybody to everyone, and neither can any of us. So I can do my focus, but really we need those partners in there doing that hard work and having those hard conversations. So I think I did get the sense that Attendance Works is going to help us with that, but even if they don't, I think we've established a pretty good team of people that are willing and with a focus on inviting more people into that conversation.
That's interesting. That kind of ties into both the discussion we're having in this meeting next with the high school start time, the importance of sleep, and also, the screen time issue that we had discussed, previously, making sure that parents are given the tools and the understanding as to the impact of screen time on, student behavior, student learning, that sort of thing. So, chicken and the egg kind of thing, as far as which goes first, but it sounds like this is all kind of interconnected. So that being said, as far as attendance works is concerned, so Greg, what do you need from us at this point?
Your blessing would be a great start. Your involvement would be a bonus. And that would begin with an understanding with this group that this is an essential initiative that we need to get rolling on, that the representation from the school committee, whether it's the program subcommittee or another variation or even one representative, that in my opinion, that we can't have a community initiative unless the elected school representatives and officials are part of that. There's also the policy connection in the school committee that is going to, arise out of this. So, there's a lot of reason to have one or more representatives from the school committee involved. We do have, Gail mentioned the group. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, so, I mean, I imagine that, moving forward with attendance works will result in various things coming back to programs as far as, again, then if policies need to be amended, when attendance works, prescribes a viable path to community outreach and community involvement. But I'm kind of thinking like, right now, if the subcommittee says, yes, we'd like you to proceed with, linking up with attendance works, do you need a referral to the full school committee? I mean, do you need beyond just a,
I don't think we need a full referral to the school committee. I guess when I say involvement, I don't mean just bring results and recommendations to the subcommittee, which is the typical pattern. I know that that's the way it's been in the past. I guess I'm asking, would one or more of you on this committee or the school committee please be part of the actual group that meets to learn from attendance works, to do the root cause analysis, and to be part of that core group of educators and community members and leaders who really set the goals and initiatives. So that, I guess that's the involvement part I'm asking. Yes, anything that comes out of that group is going to come to the program subcommittee and then the school committee for sure. If you said, yep, one or more of us would love to be on that group, sign us up. It's $11,700 for the proposal from Attendance Works. I feel absolutely certain that I can fund that from a grant without a problem, and that could be in place, as soon as we can process the new fiscal year grants. Might be as soon as mid-July, and the third week of July, if things move quickly. That would mean, I would think, trying to get the group, and maybe call it a steering committee or a group that investigates and advises. That core group might start meeting in early August is the hope. So I would like to move forward with Attendance Works, writing the grant to get that funded and get them set up to begin with us by early August, with some representation from the school committee to be part of that working group. And as Gail said, we already got, she and I'm sorry, just forgot her name from the Gloucester Health Center, the public health. Amy Epstein. There's already a good group to pick from for that group. So I think we could pull it together fairly quickly.
And just to add a little tidbit, the policy piece is not included in that number, I don't think. So if we want to talk about what our policies are as well, there is an additional fee of that. I sent that over to Greg this afternoon. I just got the proposal. It's kind of like an a la carte thing. But if we want to look at that, we might have to.
Yep, we can, I think we can swing that. We might as well have as many eyes and background information sharing, weighing in on our policy as well.
Laura, do you have a question or are you volunteering?
I'm volunteering and I have a question.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm volunteering and I have a question. So I think, I mean, it's phenomenal. It sounds great. Just given the number, you know, we talked at the last school committee meeting, Greg and Dr. Sapphire, you talked about, you know, committees that are going to need to be being set up right now to get schools started. So I'm just wondering on your capacity, but Greg especially, because it, you know, from what it sounds like to me is that there's going to be a lot of committees working very, very hard just to sort of begin the school year. And so I think this is phenomenal. You know, there's no time to waste, as Gail said, and as you said, but do we have capacity for this now, this summer, going into this new year?
Yep, it's an excellent question. And, you know, if it were any other summer, I would say, you know, we'd already be rolling. But luckily we have Gail, and she's got a lot of energy built up on this and a lot of expertise. And I would hope that Gail would be in a position to be able to really do a lot of the heavy lifting on this, but we'll have to talk and see if she can be available to do some of that, because you're right, I will definitely be running lots of committees, but I also feel that it's really important to get things rolling. The other piece is that the part of the cost, and I mentioned this to Gail, the reason I wanted to reach out to Attendance Works is because they actually will do that initial lifting for that first phase, because they're going to be helping they'll be doing the learning presentation. They'll be facilitating the root cause analysis. So that won't be any of our staff members doing that piece. We'll be along, but there's a big difference between attending and sharing your thoughts and energy and running the thing. So my hope is that if they're doing the August and September piece, then, you know, by that time, you know, and with Gail's help, by that time we can be running with it. So we would be purchasing a little bit of horsepower too.
Thank you.
So we have at least one volunteer. I see Sam's hand going up also. Sam, question, or are you volunteering also?
No, I will volunteer as well.
Great.
So you have two of the program subcommittee members willing to volunteer, so I don't think we need to put this out to the rest of the school committee if you think two is enough as representation from the committee. Or do you want me to see if the rest want in also?
I think there'll be plenty of opportunities along the way. But yeah, two's a great start.
Okay, does anyone else have anything else they want to touch on about this while we're on this topic? Okay.
Gail, it was really nice to meet you virtually.
Yeah, Gail, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming.
Very welcome.
Thanks, Gail.
Okay, moving on. So the second item is a follow-up discussion on the high school start time. I sent out some things very short while ago. I believe Laura was going to do some counter research. I was going to do some research, and what I'd like to hear, I can go into what I sent out, but my guess is that the people in attendance at this meeting at this point have heard most of it or read most of it firsthand. What I would like to point out with Dr. Sapphire here, one of the cautious pieces of pushback that Dr. Sapphire has, you know, been good enough to provide us over the years about this topic is that, you know, most of the data that was out there historically was about the necessity of sleep and the biological timetables inside of students and how it shifts, you know, during puberty. And it was kind of this, you know, a little bit of a jump to say, okay, well, if you start school later, they'll sleep more and therefore you'll hit all these targets. And what Dr. Sapphire has reminded me in previous occasions is that as more and more districts implement a later start time, it'll actually generate the data to say, okay, does this theory actually play out in reality? That if we, based on the assumption that starting later will equal more sleep, will equal better aligned sleep, will then translate into these benefits. And so I think one of the attachments I'd sent out, there's a few studies that are multi-year studies. And so I think it's helpful that we now have those kind of at our disposal. Whereas, when this committee looked at this conversation a few years back, that wasn't quite out there. I think also helpful in the material that I sent out that you can read after this. There's discussions about the obstacles, which again would be the second phase of our discussion if we got to it. But there are some proactive discussions about the impact extracurriculars, the impact transportation, the impact student employment in the community, and so that's kind of helpful to peruse as you go through it. But I'm interested to hear from Laura. We kind of asked her to say, okay, find why this isn't a good idea, or why this, or where this didn't work, and that sort of thing. And I'm curious what you found.
So let me just pull it up. Sorry. I mean, the truth, here it is. The truth is that when you search this, obviously most of the things you find are studies that show that adolescents need more sleep. So that's the first thing. I did look for the opposing view, and what I found were, let me see the date on this. So this is 2017. There were anecdotal reports on places that have done this kind of thing. Iowa City is one place. I'm just looking at this. James Madison High School in Virginia. So some places said anecdotally doesn't seem to be changing tardiness, for instance. There wasn't a lot of data in that. And I think this issue of even if school starts later, when you turn off the computer, when kids go to sleep is another part of the issue. So that's the other piece, is when are adolescents really going to go to sleep, even if you're starting later. So those were just some questions that were raised. I didn't find a lot of data because as you say, I don't think there's enough districts doing it at this point. But there were, and then of course, there are issues around sort of the logistics, the extracurriculars, the buses. Interestingly, some districts did it to save money on bus times. This looks like a high school in Seattle did that. And the principal of that high school, this is the Ballard High School in Seattle, they did it to save money, but they're not, he still anecdotally said that the kids are still coming in tired because it's 8:45 a.m., which is still early. It's better than 7:50, but it's still too late. I mean, it's still too early for an adolescent brain. So all that to say, I didn't find a ton. I mean, there is opposing data, but I didn't find it in any sort of really scientific format.
Okay. I think just while I'm making note, if you get a chance, and Greg and Mr. Cook, now that you're here, I'll forward you what was sent. As we discussed last time, sorry for my dog making noise, because the entire state of California has mandated the school shift, there was a wealth of information that was out in California, and there's actually a state senator's office put together this 200+ page information packet with various studies. And when you get to that, I think there was a helpful table on page 25 of the PDF that, again, kind of talked about a pro and con kind of thing as far as difficulties with some of the solutions. And then I think on page 131, there was a study that was showing improvement across all skill sets. It was actually those who had the largest room for improvement as far as performance benefited the most, and those who were in the 90th percentile, there was less room, they still bumped up. And one of the, again, these are all just, various studies, and we can't necessarily accept their conclusions wholesale standalone. But one of the interesting things for me was on page 132. This study concluded that the benefit of pushing school to 8:30 or later. My dog is making every noise he can make right now. So sorry. Hold on one second. Get out. On 132, it talked about that it equated the improvement to student performance with reducing class size by 1/3 the number of students, or by taking an average, a teacher of average effectiveness and replacing that teacher with a teacher that scored in the 84th or higher percentile of effectiveness. And that was, changing nothing except for the start time. Kind of push that out. Yeah, Laura?
Joel, I haven't had a chance to really look at this data, but this is old. Like what I'm seeing, I'm looking at what you're looking at, and this is from 2015. So I don't think there's data yet from. I mean, I think this is the May. I haven't been able to look through it carefully, but I think this may have been the data going into the California change. I'm not sure that this is actually results.
No, that's correct. That's what they were using to base their.
Right.
But so that 2015 study, I could be wrong, but there's there are some districts that have been doing this since the early 2000s, and so these, although some of the studies are 14, 15, 16, they're pulling half a decade or decade plus of data. And then I found, just coincidentally, because as I said, California eats up the first 2 or 3 pages of a Google search because of the publicity around it. But there was a Pennsylvania study that just came out in October of last year, and they took a look at some of their counties or districts that had moved and compared them to the districts that had not moved. And, that was pretty impressive as far as it actually linking up with the stated goals of moving the start time seemed to be proven out in the data itself. If I can get it real quick. The 2 findings they made for best practices would be the ideal start time for secondary school students is 8:30 or later. And sleep health literacy being an important component of any school health curriculum. Those are the 2 big best practices that came away from that Pennsylvania study. So that kind of, that being said, we'd kind of discussed previously that we need to decide whether or not this is something we want to continue to explore. And if it is, the next set would be to explore logistical hurdles. And again, while the ones we'll have in Gloucester will not necessarily be new or unheard of, and hopefully there are strategies out there, much in the same way the attendance work discussion talked about how, we're not the first district to have an absenteeism problem, and attendance work hopefully has, solutions for us. I would hope there are solutions out there, but nevertheless, Gloucester will have its own unique set of challenges, to tackle. And so I'm trying to get some feedback from the subcommittee here as to, whether we want to continue exploring, the difficulties. Go for it, Laura.
I just, I think, we're going into this fall. I think the attendance works project, from what everyone is saying to us, is critical. We're going to have a new superintendent. I'm just not sure we can add this major. I mean, I know we can keep doing the research, but it feels like, relating to all of the pieces that are going to need to be put together of this puzzle going in, plus taking on this critical issue of attendance and all the connected pieces of that trauma, and the trauma that's going to be increased, and remote learning, and a new leader of the district. I don't mean to be negative. I think it's an important conversation, but I'm just not sure that we can take on another major shift at this point and really keep our focus, So
I'm curious whether, I was thinking about that also, but I was thinking of it kind of glass half full, in the same way that this pandemic has forced us to adopt some technology and some strategies. Principal Cook was just talking about how teachers are already kind of learning how to intervene on students who are displaying some absenteeism with some scripts. I'm wondering, is this, does this actually in some ways make it a better time to explore this? Because you know what? This fall is going to look, I'm not saying we'll have it in place for this fall, but this next school year is going to look weird anyway. And that means we won't have had a sense of normal, right? So one of the biggest things is changing from what's normal and what's understood. And I was just thinking, like, this past spring for the high school, it started at 9. Once we went to remote online learning, I think the classes all started at 9, right? And like, there it was, right? So I don't know if there's a way to, if there's actually synergy here as we're kind of retooling the way we think about what a school day looks like. If, like Principal Cook, I know we're still waiting for the DESE guidance, but, has the discussion about returning back to the 7:37 start time, been had yet, or is that still waiting on DESE to tell you what to do?
Yeah, we haven't had any discussions about time, adjusting our times yet. Yeah, we would need the guidance before we go forward. Of course,
Was
we're
the
always
impetus-
having
Sure.
conversation like you're
Was the
bringing
impetus
up.
for the 9 a.m. start local or out of DESE also?
No, that came up. Just we had the half-day guidance, remember, right? So when figuring out where to start the half-day, also we're thinking about families and getting the kids up and daycares being closed and getting into their day routine and that sort of thing. We also talked to other districts as well about what are they, what part of the half-day are you looking at? That a 9 to 12 approach seemed to make the most sense. And definitely, I guess anecdotally, we'll also, not just anecdotally, but in survey data, we'll be hearing soon, now that we have students doing the survey data, about the schedule. They're giving us some feedback about the schedule. So it'll be interesting to see how the later start time, if that shows up in the comments where they explain, their answers. We'll maybe have something for you there.
Well, Sam?
And I'm sure we don't know the answer to this, but are sports going to be, are they giving us guidance on whether or not sports are going to be allowed? Or back to sort of Joel's point, maybe this is a good year to try it if we're not going to be engaging in any extracurricular.
The Department of Ed is looking at the issue of sports. One direction they're looking at is the nature of the sport itself. Football is more physical than soccer, let's say, and there's more potential for exposure. Another issue has to do with transportation. If, they may not do freshman and sophomore sports because in order to take an athletic team to whatever destination, instead of using one bus, they may have to use 2 or 3 buses or something along those lines. That's about all I've heard so far.
Okay.
It's another DESE, hurry up and wait. We'll let you know.
Right, and to Laura's point, this is it's weird. I feel like this topic and others, we keep having these conversations where we go, well, we got to have the conversation now, but if we can wait 2 more weeks or 2 more months or or 1 more quarter, we'll have a better, we'll have more information to have this conversation. But if we don't have the conversation now, we won't have planned in advance for the. It's been very weird for this whole process. I think this is one of them. Again, just to go back to Dr. Sapphire, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I'm leaving, but the argument that this is an opportune time and that looking at the late start time as being complementary, I'm sorry, in my opinion, that doesn't ring true. It's additive. There are so many things which we tried to articulate at the last school committee meeting. There are so many things on the plate and so much lack of certainty at this point in time, and so much of a need for focus by so many people. I have to subscribe to Laura's point of view. It is just, it's unfortunate, but it's just not the right time. There's just too much going down.
Sam.
I guess I'm more in favor, if we are continuing with remote, to explore the later start time, merely because of the arguments that Mr. Cook just said, right? That if I had to teach remote and I have 2 kids, 7:30 is to me a joke. To try to get myself up and out and doing that. And I also am curious, even if there is daycare, right? So I'm just trying to think of from a young parent's perspective, you're going to be having to wait. From what I'm gathering, right? Parents are not going to be able to go in all at once. There's going to have to be a staggered time in between drop-offs. Everything is going to take longer. And so I do feel like it's worth at least thinking about the possibility of giving everybody a little bit of sort of grace in how they arrive, because I think 7:30 is pushing it. From if everything is going to take as long as I sort of imagined it will, you're going to be having issues with teachers being tardy, kids being tardy. So I don't know. I'm not saying that we need to across the board make a huge decision, but I think it's worth a conversation about how our start times are going to impact people, even with remote learning.
Yeah, to jump on that also, again, well, I appreciate what Dr. Sapphire is saying, because obviously, this is definitely additive in the way he's described it. I'm curious if nevertheless it still becomes complementary, perhaps as we work our way through the attendance works process and they start talking about, okay, well, here's your toolbox and here are your, I keep going back, and one of the things that I've been kind of pushing this for a long time is, although it is not without headache, it is otherwise free. This is a free adjustment that, again, there may be some, we had discussions previously in previous years about there may be additional transportation costs, but it's not a wholesale, okay, we have to hire this department, we have to hire this cadre of interventionists or support specialists. This is an administrative alteration that we make as a district, and again, achieve goals that we are otherwise spending a lot of time and money trying to address. And so, although I don't want to do this poorly, because this, much like Greg's point about the attendance being a community-wide buy-in, this obviously would have to have huge community outreach, huge community support to make sure that this kind of sea change goes through, which is why, again, if there's a way to just kind of merge it to the unintended sea change that the COVID-19 pandemic has forced upon us, maybe you avoid that hassle. But nevertheless, we as a community or we as a district are still trying to address these problems with time, energy, and money. And I'm just, this just seems to be the one that requires time and energy, but not money. And it would be nice to have this free tool implemented as we're, paying for other support staff, paying for interventionists, paying for, third-party providers, that sort of thing. And so I have a hard time striking the balance. And one last thing I'll say, just to, everyone should be aware of their biases, right? So obviously I have this frustration bias because it's, for the last 5 years, it hasn't been the right time, hasn't been the right time, hasn't been the right time. Obviously, no one saw COVID-19 coming. I appreciate that. But I fear, based on what I've heard from, the administration on this, is that, if we keep waiting for the right time to address this, we may never get to it, because I don't know that it's ever going to be the right time. This is never going to be easy or convenient. And I thought there might be some opportunity over the next year, while we're refiguring out what school looks like, to also kind of have this be a driving force or a collaborative force or something. Sam?
Just to sort of piggyback on that, if we're talking about, a high attendance rate at the high school with an average of 33 missed days, if that's not the right time to talk about start times, I don't really know when is. Just in my opinion, I think it would be a missed opportunity not to at least engage in the conversation while we're also exploring attendance. Because at least we can use that as sort of a good excuse to explore the issue as we're exploring the attendance issue.
Laura?
So absolutely, Sam. And my assumption is that Attendance Works is going to do this root cause analysis and look for solutions and policy issues. We're going to pay the extra a la carte for policy. And I don't know if start time comes under that category, but it totally makes sense when we're looking at how to attack these issues in the district. And also, so that's one piece, but I would look, if we let the attendance issue lead the way there, I think, especially if we're deciding that that's the focus, I think that makes sense. The other piece is if we're in a remote learning environment, and again, we have no idea. James, I don't know if are you able to say remote learning starts at 9? I mean, remote learning is not people in the building, so it's a whole different situation. And if we're on remote learning, chances are there's no sports. So like there's a whole different, I'm just wondering, it may be sort of like a soft open if things go that way, but does it need, is it a policy? And this is just a question. Is it a policy what time school starts during remote learning? Or is that something we're going to be figuring out as we go along?
Or is that going to also be prescriptive?
Right, we don't know, is my assumption. But James, I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that first, because again, and the 9 o'clock time was a reaction to the direction about half days, as I said before, and what would be the best place to have a half day. The initial feedback we're getting from kids is that this having a schedule and having times was incredibly valuable to kids in our building. And then teachers, as they got more used to the technology, had more and more Zoom or Meet opportunities, and they got better at it too, piecing it out. So I'm going to have 5 kids in the Zoom at this time and be engage with them in the work, and then another group of kids, and then some time at the end for kids to come back maybe who needed some extra help. They got crafty about using the hour that was dedicated to them. So schedule is important. So that's just a long way of saying schedule is important, but we don't know what wiggle room we'll have. I will say, I wonder if the thing we're not, or will offer that I think what we're not talking about here is we don't have the teacher's perspective at this point. And I think that is one of the biggest aspects of any shift in the schedule will be, not just the GTA as an entity, but having teachers, getting a sense of what this would mean for them. Because we've talked about the difficulties in the morning, right? But we also have folks who are going to meet kids getting off the bus at home, in terms of daycare and so on. And I think that would be, if this is something the subcommittee decides to move forward with, I think getting teacher voice and figuring out and beginning that conversation, is essential before going too far down any road.
It's a great point. So as far as what to do now, Mr. Cook, Greg, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, just had to find the unmute button. I agree. It makes complete sense to look at it within the context of attendance, and that could be the value added piece that Attendance Works brings. I mean, you can't do this at a national level and work with lots of districts and not have addressed this issue. So I would imagine that that's built right into their knowledge base and certainly could be part of the conversation. Beyond that, I hear what you say about it never being the right time. It's really unfortunate that a pandemic happened to be this not right time. Because if there were any not right times, this is the one. But I'm certainly willing to look at and take advantage of opportunities that present themselves. One might be, if we're doing this remotely, by all means, we should be really experimenting with that start time. All of those classic restrictions like sports and transportation just don't come into it. So there would be no better time if we have the flexibility. And I suspect that we will have some flexibility around the actual start time, probably not the length of the day or certain composition of the day, but I can't imagine that they will dictate. I mean, they don't dictate right now what time a school has to start. So I can't imagine that would be any part of it. So, I mean, I see two opportunities in the near term, which are utilizing the attendance works consulting and that strand, and taking advantage of any remote learning opportunities. I think those are, pretty good ways to get started on this. As far as wholesale move toward rearranging, I think there's too much in play next year, but anything like this has to be planned for, is planned out a ways anyway. So, we can be working toward it. I think you might feel better, Joel, if we actually were doing some concrete small steps and we actually, space them out and do them. It might feel that we are making some progress, and it's got to be a long-term solution anyway.
Mr. Cook?
So I'll just, for me, listening to all of this but also even the last time we talked about it, I do think this emerging out of the conversation about attendance, as we've been talking about, is the way in which it will catalyze momentum. And if this becomes one of the focal areas that seems to maybe do the most work to make some attendance improvement, I think that's the way to actually get more buy-in from folks who might be resistant and so on, because the core thing is, getting kids in engaging in the learning. That's the reason we care about the start time, is so that students are able to be here and engage in the learning. And so if we're looking at that comprehensively through attendance, and this is a component of that, I would see that as the best action. And to add to what Greg said as well, not only will attendance works have as its expertise this national focus, but then locally, right, if folks who are working on the committee here would include, right, we have had some conversations about start time, right? So seed that would be something we would be perhaps interested in looking at. With the teenagers I live with at home, I see the benefits of all that we're talking about here, in addition to the studies that we've read and looking at what's going on in California. So I have an interest in this. However, I do know that sometimes if this becomes the singular focus and is right, it can derail other good work. So I'm seeing the benefits of an interest in this area is emerging out of the deep examination of attendance and deep focus on attendance. And I heard other folks say the same thing in the conversation.
So Sam, Laura, I mean, it seems to be a pretty unified piece of advice coming from Dr. Sapphire, Greg, and from Mr. Cook, as far as, if this is we don't want to overtax staff. However, there's some recognition that if this is overlapping or stemming from the attendance works piece that we've already discussed, this would be a way to go about it. Does that sound satisfactory to the two of you?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if we, if there is a chance to have a start time for remote learning be later, that's good data, right? For us to sort of be able to ask kids how they felt about it and teachers how they felt about it. So it will give us sort of some time to really think through that option.
Yeah, agreed.
So with that kind of, informal request to the administration, obviously within their capacity to make those adjustments and, based on whatever DESE guidance comes out and whatever, real-time adjustments have to be made in the field as we go through this fall. Do we want to pick this back up after the new year and just see how things went and see whether we got some stuff from attendance works, see whether we were able to implement some time shift on the remote stuff and just see what it looked like?
Sure. And I would say also, as someone who volunteered with Samantha to be part of the attendance work stuff, I mean, I think as Greg said, like it can be one of the tools in the toolbox potentially as we go down that road. And we can be there to, Sam and I can be there to raise that if others don't. And I'm sure, you know, and
or maybe Attendance Works will come in and say, oh guys, later start times are great, but you need to do these other things first. Don't even think about that until you get these things locked down, right?
Right. So I think following their lead, if we're going to go in that direction and pay them to bring their expertise to us, I think we should do that. That's my opinion.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything else they would like to add? Okay. Seeing none, I guess I will call for a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Maria, if you're with us, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Sam,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
and Joel.
Yes. Thank you so much to everyone who came and provided input. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you guys. Have a good night.
you.